So we are now recording. I appreciate folks you taking time out of your day for joining us today. We have with us Ashley Sims, who lost her father, Chris Babbitt, back in November to COVID-19. Ashley's from Griffith. We have Louise Babbitt, the wife of Chris, and we have Nancy Batliner from Highland, who has joined us here today. We really appreciate you folks taking the time to do this. Let's start with Ashley and Louise. Tell me a little bit about Chris. Help us understand who he was as a person.
Great.
I don't know if you guys can hear me, but it says it just everything froze. Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, great. Can you tell us a little bit about who Chris was as a person? Help us understand who he was.
Well, I wrote down this morning as I was trying to collect my thoughts. So I wrote it in my phone, and I'll try to read what I wrote without crying. Nance, do you have it with you? In case I start crying, you could pick it up?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so I wrote, my dad was one of the good ones. He was practical, he was quick-witted, he was altruistic. He loved his family unconditionally. He was deeply in love with his wife of 42 years. He was proud of his grandkids. He was always a phone call away and never turned anyone down when they needed any help. He went to work every day and worked for the mill for 44 years and gave it his all. He used to be called Superman by his coworkers in his younger years because there wasn't any stopping him and his hard work ethic. He provided a great life for our family when my brother and I were growing up. He was our #1 fan when we played sports. If you were to ask anybody today, they'd say that my dad was a great guy. I've learned these past 2 months as I've spent time helping my mom, how much everybody my dad had crossed paths with throughout his life had nothing but great things to say about him as well. It's really heartfelt when you know that your dad's a great guy, but it speaks volumes when you know people that surrounded my dad had also felt the same way about him. It's been very comforting to know that people agree with how we think he's so great, that everybody else that he encountered thinks he was great as well.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. You described in your wonderful letter your father as Superman. Tell me a little bit about some of the specific qualities that made him stand out as a Superman.
Well, at work, he was never afraid to go in and help. He was a supervisor. He got in trouble a lot for helping because he's not supposed to. But when anybody needed anything, he was right there with it. He'd jump into the slag and everything with everybody else. And that's why they called him Superman. He was always willing, ready to go.
He started at Inland, in 1976? Yeah, as a laborer. And he worked his way up from labor all the way to plant supervisor of the 7th furnace at Middle. And my husband, he's a union laborer and has come across with people that my dad's worked with. And that's what they all say is, you're Superman's, son-in-law, you're Superman, is he still? And, as you age, my dad was 62. So a lot of the stuff that he did back then, he wasn't still able to do, but that's like how they labeled him as, it wasn't ever just Chris, it was Superman. Just because he just had such a good work ethic and he just worked very, very hard and worked his way up from the bottom. And he always knew where he came from. Even becoming a supervisor, it never went to his head. He was always, he knew what the laborer was going through or this one was going through. So he never let it go to his head. He just, he was always willing to help, lend a helping hand to anybody, no matter what their position was.
His years coming up through the ranks helped him identify with the people that he was now leading.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
He didn't forget where he came from.
Right.
Which of the mills was he working at? Middle? Which location?
7th furnace, at the one in East Chicago.
Gotcha. And he was a plant supervisor there with the steel workers?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about Chris as a Superman, as a father, and as a husband.
Well, he really pampered me and did a lot for me. And I never had to ever go out and cut the grass if I didn't want to. He was always there for me. If I said I wanted a room painted, he'd paint it 10 times if I didn't like the color. And he just was always there for me.
Like I said, he was always at all of our sporting events in high school because my brother and I graduated from Griffith High School. So we joke because when we were in high school, he was really the #1 Panther fan. He drove a green Jeep Wrangler and he had like the license plate on the front that was, Griffith Panther father, and it was my brother's football number was on it. And then my brother's 5 years older than me. So we were in high school at different times. And then I was a cheerleader in high school, 5 years, younger than my brother. And he supported my husband who played football. And he was just really like, he always had to be, he never missed a Friday night football game. He was always there, and then when we, got married and started having kids, it was, he was always there for the grandkids. My nephew is 9 and he plays baseball, which is one of my dad's favorite sports. And, he would be there to watch the games. And my daughter, who's 11, he would always go to her softball games and was proud that she finally found a sport that she liked, because she tried the soccer, she tried the cheerleading, she tried this, and he was proud that she finally picked softball, and that was his sport, so he understood it. And she just started playing it a year ago, so he really just started going to the games, but he was always just there, and always
Cheering her on.
Yeah, and always just was willing to be there for all of us, and if somebody got locked out of a house, you'd call and Dad would go and he would come with the house key, to your house and unlock the door. If somebody needed to be picked up from school because my mom and I were out shopping or out to lunch, like I'd call my dad if he was home from work and he would go pick my daughter up at school. And, like Nance, like if you needed anything, he would be there for you, and if his mom is still alive and if she needs the snow shoveled, my dad would stop there on his way to work in Hammond and he would shovel her snow and then off to work he'd go. He'd clean my Aunt Janae, her car off, if it was in the driveway, because he might be there at 5 o'clock in the morning shoveling the snow. He was just always just so willing. And like, as he got older and he got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which was a struggle for him, but, it gave him a lot of pain, his joint pain, and he had a double knee replacement. He had a shoulder replacement. He almost had his ankle completely reconstructed, and he still did all of it. Like he never
said he was in pain.
Yeah, no, he never stopped, like even with everything that he had going on, he was still willing to do everything that his mind at, his 21-year-old mind would still tell him to do at 62.
How many children and grandchildren did Chris have?
He has me, his daughter, and then my brother is Christopher Jr.
Okay.
He's 40. And then he has 3 grandchildren. My brother has Morgan, who is 13, Chase, who is 9, and then my daughter Addison, who is 11.
Okay. Nancy, tell me a little bit about Chris as a Superman brother.
It's kind of funny because I was married to Batman, and so they were the dynamic duo, kind of thing. When Ashley, I'm gonna cry too. When Ashley was talking about shoveling my mom's sidewalk, when I would get there and saw that Chris had done it, I'm like, God, he beat me, kind of thing. And so he was always there. I lived probably a half a mile, a quarter a mile from where he and Louise live. And if I have a door that needs to be fixed, my husband was not even though his father was a carpenter and a construction person, my husband did not get those abilities. And so it was always my brother who would come over. One of my there's millions of memories, but one of my great memories is my nephew Chris had the great idea that when my daughter graduated to let's have a pig roast. And so my brother was at my house that Saturday morning at, I don't know, 7, and it was probably 110 degrees in 2011. And there he was with that thing tied around his head, sitting on the truck, making sure that that pig, you know, was roasted in that. And so everybody else would have the ideas, but my brother was the one who made them come to fruition. You know, my mom has a place in Plymouth, just a little trailer. And when I go down, I could never turn, you know, we have to turn the water on and off, and I could never get that stupid water on. So I would have to call him and say, Chris, what am I doing wrong? You know, and he's, and then he would calm down, and then he would just tell me, you know, do this, do that, you know, kind of thing. And so, yeah, he was the end all be all of, you know, he did everything for everybody, just like, you know, he would come down and watch my sister and I, well, we're a bowling family, and he kind of had to stop because of his knees, but he would come down every Thursday to watch us bowl. He'd, you know, come to see my son. You know, my son almost bowled his first 300. He told my brother that was there. He's like, Uncle Chris, don't leave yet. Don't leave yet. I'm going to bowl a 300. And I think he had the front 9, you know, and my brother's like, oh my God, he's going to, you know, kind of thing. So yeah, he was everything to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like, you know, I've heard it said for a family man, for a father, especially for a parent as well, 90% of the game of being a good one is just being present. And it sounds to me like Chris really had that one down. In fact, It sounds like he arrived early and stayed late.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you for sharing those things. Tell me a little bit about the circumstances that, and I know this is difficult, tell me a little bit about the circumstances that led to Chris contracting COVID-19. How did you find out? How did it first show up? And then tell me a little bit about that progression as he, you know, as he went toward the end.
Well, as hard as it is to say, it was a family gathering October 24th, just to meet, to drop off some food and to have an outdoor bonfire. And it was my husband, my daughter, myself, my mom and my dad, and my brother, his wife, and my niece and nephew. And we were just getting together, you know, drop off some food. Morgan, my niece, she wanted my mom to make a dessert, and she wanted me to make puppy chow. And we weren't planning on staying long, and we had just stopped by to drop it off, and my brother was going to have a bonfire. So we said, okay, you know, we'll sit by the bonfire. And he, on Monday, that was a Saturday. And on Monday, he had come into contact with somebody in his work that had COVID and kind of didn't speak up right away. So he started getting a little bit of symptoms, and a couple days had passed, and he tested positive, and his wife tested positive. And then my mom and dad and all of us went to go get tested, and my mom and dad were both positive. And then my husband, myself, and my daughter went to test, and we were negative. And it was kind of like, well, what did we do different? Because we were, you know, together sitting at the bonfire, you know, why did it skip us, you know? So it skipped us. And I kind of have a timeline here written on my phone about how it went. So my dad on November 4th was having a little bit of issues. My mom said breathing.
Yes.
So they had kind of been, for the most part, my mom was staying in her bedroom upstairs, and my dad was downstairs in the family room, but they were checking on each other. I ordered them that pulse oximeter because everybody was, you know, you need to make sure the oxygen's okay. You know, you need to make sure the oxygen's okay. And so my dad, he would call my Aunt Janae, who's a nurse, and, you know, sit and ask her, you know, my oxygen's this today. What do you think? You know, do you think it's okay? You know, and Janae would keep in touch. And, you know, me being COVID negative, I wasn't coming here to be able to check on them. I was just relying on the phone call, you know, and I was the biggest pain in the ass to my dad. You know, he why are you calling? And my dad, he doesn't text message. And so I would send him a text message, what's your oxygen level? And he, would get super mad. Well, that day on November 4th, I think my mom said his oxygen was about like 88. So she, in her nightgown, which is totally not my mom, said, I'm taking you to the emergency room. And she dropped him off at the emergency room door. And she said, call me from your cell phone with whatever happens. And he ended up calling. And I scroll back at my text messages now, and there's my annoying self saying, what are they saying? Are they going to admit you? Like, what are they, what are they doing? And he said, no, I'm waiting for now. I think he was there 4 or 5 hours. And he said that he was waiting for my mom to pick him up that day. And he came home, and I remember, I think it was a garbage night in Griffith, and I had came by because he had asked me to pick up popsicles because him and my mom like to eat popsicles before bed. So he told me not to bring them until the next day, but I was adamant that I'm just going to drop him off at the front door, and I'm just going to leave him there. Well, I caught him outside taking the garbage out. And he was out of breath, and he said, I told you not to bring the popsicles tonight. I told you to bring them tomorrow morning. And I said, well, I wanted you to have them before you went to bed in case, you were feeling like kind of just feverish or whatever. I wanted him to have the damn popsicles, so he didn't look really great. And I was just shocked. I remember calling my mom the next day saying, Dad was really out of breath. Like, why would they send him home? And I guess because his oxygen went up to above 90 or 91 when he was there. So that was November 4th, and November 8th, it was a Sunday, and my dad called me in the morning, and it was about 10 o'clock, and he said, I'm taking your mother to the emergency room when she gets out of the shower. And I said, what? Like, you're taking mom to the emergency room? He said, yeah, she's having trouble. She said that she can't breathe. And I said, wait a second, like, why is she in the shower? Because they have glass doors. And I'm like, why is she in the shower, Dad? And I said, like, what if she passes out? And he said, oh, she's fine. Well, I should have known right then and there something was wrong with him too, because I can't believe he said that. So then, like, a couple hours had went by, and where we live in Griffith, like, the closest Burger King is by my parents' house on 45th. So my husband said he was hungry, and he said, let's go and get Burger King for lunch. And so we drove, and I said, well, I don't really know what I was looking for, but I felt that, like, we had to drive by my parents' house. So we drove by my parents' house, and when we pulled up, their front door was open, and my dad's truck was in the driveway still. And I said, well, that's odd, because if he would have taken or called the ambulance for my mom, like, their front door wouldn't have been open. So I called from the streets, and my mom answered the phone, gasping for air, and said that, I said, why haven't you gone when the ambulance, did Dad not call 911? And she said, he's getting dressed. And I said, wait, I'm like, this has been hours. Like, what have you guys been doing? So she said, well, he's getting dressed and I'm just sitting here on the couch. But mind you, it wasn't like fluent like that. She was gasping for air. And I said, well, I'm calling 911 right now. So I called 911, and I had, told them I'm COVID negative. I'm outside. I'm like in the driveway, and my parents are both COVID positive. Well, my mom's oxygen level was 62 when they came inside to check her. And they told me that her lips were blue, and came out and told me, and I said, that's what she told me when I called her. And I asked her, why haven't you gone yet? I'm calling 911. I'm like, when I asked what her oxygen was, she said it was 62. So they went in, they were getting my mom ready to come out. And of course, my dad stayed quiet, like, I'm not going to say that anything's wrong with me. And he, I said, you need to check my dad too. So the medics checked my dad, and his oxygen level was 84. And I said, well, he needs to go too. My dad wouldn't have volunteered to go. He would have said, I'm fine. It'll come back up. I'm fine. And they took my mom out on a stretcher, and they told my dad to walk to the ambulance himself. And, my mom, myself, my husband, and my daughter were out in the driveway, and we watched my dad walk to the ambulance. And they took both of them away in the same ambulance. And that was really the last time that I seen my dad alive. And they got admitted about 3 a.m, my dad sent me a text message. Both of them got admitted to the IMCU at Community. My mom was in room 3011 and my dad was in 3009. And I remember saying, is there any way that they could see each other? Is there any way that they could be put in the same room together? You know, because they both had COVID, and they said no. And let me check my timeline here, because my mom started to get better, and my dad had texted me on November 11th about 4:20 in the morning, and he said, I'm going to ICU to let my mom know and to let my Aunt Janae know. And I said, okay. And I said, I'll wait to hear from the nurse. And I didn't hear from the nurse for probably like 4 hours. It was a long time, but I had to stop and think for a second, because my mom and dad both received the remdesivir. They both received the convalescent plasma. My mom was progressing, but my dad was not. And I was like, well, if I tell my mom that my dad is not in the room next to her anymore and he's in ICU, is that going to make her health decline? So I called my brother and I called him to my parents' house, and we sat at their kitchen table and we're like, well, what are we going to tell mom? So we decided we weren't going to tell her that day. We were going to let things try to pan out to see, because it wasn't an emergency when my dad was going to ICU. They were doing it as a precaution, because he was on the OptiFlow and the non-rebreather mask in IMCU. And they told me that he needed to be put on BiPAP, and BiPAP only was available in ICU now. So he went on the BiPAP, and he was okay. Every time we called, my brother and I made a pact, and we're like, well, we're going to call early in the morning at like 4:30. We're going to call around lunchtime, and then we're going to call right before we go to bed, and let's try to stretch our bedtime, till 11 o'clock or something, just because we didn't want to be a pest. But they're our only lifeline, like the ICU nurses, to say how your dad's doing, because there was no going and seeing. My dad doesn't like technology, so it really wasn't, it was there to be able to do FaceTime, but he couldn't talk, because every time he talked, his oxygen level dropped, which scared the daylights out of him, and so we never wanted to do it. And November 17th, my mom came home, and on November 19th, I got a phone call that one of my dad's lungs, I think, had collapsed, and he ended up having to have a chest tube put in. And the chest tube fell out, and they ended up having to, in an emergency situation, put him on a ventilator. And, my mom was sitting here, and they called, and, it was like, we're going to put the chest tube back in, and then, he's going to have to be ventilated. And that's how that went. And every time you called thereafter, it was, well, the pneumothorax at the collapsed lung, it's getting a little bit better. It's getting a little bit better, but then the other lung started to collapse. And then he ended up having to start dialysis because his kidneys were shutting down. And then, his lungs were starting to harden. And then it was every time you called, there was never anything positive that they would say. It was just, we're so sorry to tell you this. He's just maintaining, his CO2 levels are high. This is high, this is, he might have infection. He might have this. And it was just, every time you called, it was something not good. So anything like when you see on the TV, like of what everybody says is exactly, I followed that gentleman in Hobart who was the pastor and who lost the wife. And I remember following so closely, I'm not friends with him on Facebook, but I followed it, and I'm like, gosh, like we're now living his life here in November. And he passed away on the 24th. We got a phone call, and it was so awkward because I was at my mom's house because I was staying with her, and because she came home on 5 liters of oxygen, and I was sitting across the room, and it was the hospital, and the hospital said, your dad's dying right now. And I said, what? Like, because You know, he was maintaining. It was never he was going to die. He was maintaining. And I looked at my mom from across the room, and she was like, "What's happening?" And I gave her the thumbs down. And she said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "They're going to put us on FaceTime because my dad's heart rate went to 0 and his blood pressure shot up. And we watched him die on FaceTime."
So sorry.
So it wasn't just dealing with just a dad, it was my mom too.
Yeah, I can't imagine, and Louise, I can't imagine how difficult it was to be going through treatment for that disease at the same time that
It's a nightmare.
you knew exactly what it felt like, and you knew what he was going through too.
Right. It's a nightmare. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I said it felt like somebody puts a plastic bag over your head, and as you're gasping, the plastic bag is getting tighter and tighter. That's exactly how it feels.
Your family been through.
He
Sorry,
was
go ahead.
super agitated through the whole very beginning, because I think I think he didn't sleep for 4 days,
Yeah.
because I think he was afraid to sleep, you know, because of the breathing part of it. So, you know, it was so sad to hear it, because you know, somebody equated it to like you're drowning and you know you're drowning. Well, of course you don't want to go to sleep, you know, so it's an agonizing, and for the people who don't think it's real, or for the people who think it's fake, shame on you, shame on you.
Mhm. I received a text message, you know, because like I said, I was my dad's pain in the ass, always trying to get him to talk when he was there. And so I figured, well, if he couldn't talk, then maybe he would Facebook message me or text message me, you know. And I had asked him one day, I said, how are you doing, Dad? And he said, "I'm scared." And when it's Superman and he's scared, what do you say to help him? Because your dad never tells you he's scared ever before. He's never told me that. I remember calling the nurses and I said, "What can I do to help him not be scared?" And they were, you know, it was about the time before he was in ICU, he was scared in IMCU. They said, you know, bring him his favorite sandwich or bring him his favorite ice cream, you know, send pictures up. So I called my brother and I said, gather your pictures and make sure that they're big enough for him to be able to see from his hospital bed. And I said, if there's a bulletin board, I said, we'll decorate it with cards from the kids and drawings and pictures. And, you know, we sent those up because, you know, it's been hard because you can't be there. And like, we would have been there every single day, all night. And then I thought, well, maybe he's scared because everybody that comes in is completely garbed up. You know, he's not seeing any familiar faces. Right. He's not seeing any familiar voices. You know, so maybe that's what he meant when he was scared. But I don't know. Did he know? Because my dad suffers from rheumatoid arthritis. And so he has no immune system. And he takes the Enbrel injections, you know, every Monday. And it was always told to him that if he got this, it would not be good. And so did he know going in, you know, after those first couple days that he probably wasn't going to come out? Is that why he was saying he was scared? Was he, I don't know. Was he scared? You know, I think he was scared to close his eyes. I know he was scared to talk on the phone because his oxygen would drop. And he just told me, you know, I didn't sleep for 4 days. I sat in a chair for 4 days. And so, I mean, so like he was very agitated and very, you know, anxious. But I mean, like you always think like, gosh, what would it feel like if you were drowning? But I guess, you know, like Nancy said, that's probably what COVID's like.
Well, your family has been through so much with this, and Nancy addressed it a little bit earlier. What's a message that you would try to impart to other folks that maybe haven't gone through this yet? Maybe they're the folks that you see out there that aren't necessarily taking this as seriously as some other folks do. What's a message that you might deliver to them?
that it's definitely real. It's go ahead.
No, go ahead.
It's real. You know, I just, we followed it from the very beginning. My husband is calling me Dr. Fauci. And because, we'd say, make sure you wear the mask, use the wipes, use the hand sanitizer, don't touch this, don't touch that. And I never in my life thought we would get it. We were just so careful, but it's definitely real. And what you see on TV, believe it.
And like, I think I said this whole entire time, getting back to the Superman thing, like, I think that's what my dad would want to know. Like, it killed Superman. It's, my dad, everybody would say like, oh, he's so strong. Like my husband said the whole time, your dad's going to come out of this, Ashley. He's going to come out of this. Like your dad is strong like an ox. You don't have anything to worry about. He's going to bounce back from this. They're just going to, give him his medicines. They're going to do what they have to do. And it's just like everything else that you don't know and you don't always hear that accompanies COVID, it all happened to my dad. And it's just, it swiped him out from under his feet. And, it's, of all things, like that's what it had to be. And I was reading an article online about COVID, and they were saying about how COVID is a different type of grief. And it's like, because you grieve a little bit different about it, because nobody says that cancer is not real. Everybody believes that cancer is real and what cancer can do. And everybody, second guesses COVID. The masks don't work. This doesn't work. Keeping kids out of school doesn't work. Don't go to the grocery store. I mean, it's like, there's just not enough out there to like, not enough research. And it's like, everybody's trying to do the best that they can with what the information that they're given, but it's 100% real.